Your opinion required.
So today I wanted to share something interesting I discovered. Now, I have a centrist political view, and I've recently realised how the right-wing media is acting exactly like the left-wing media. Now, I've seen the emotional-driven left-wing with bullhorns and picket signs scream emotional tirades at other counter-protesters and reporters because they have a cognitive dissonance episode when presented with demonstrable facts. Now, it seems the right do the same in an attempt to get their views across and even use foreign situations to their benefit to push their agenda. Yeah, and I'm talking about Tucker Carlson and his comments related to the Australian lockdown situation.
The government has implemented total lockdowns nationwide and then imposed martial law to enforce those lockdowns. What's the justification for this? Well, here are the numbers. From mid-July until last week, the entire nation of Australia, that's 25 million people, has averaged about 1.5 COVID deaths per day out of 25 million people. And that has been enough to justify the end of Australia and totalitarianism. In one recent case, which really does say it all, authorities executed rescue dogs, shot the dogs to death to prevent Australian dog lovers from traveling to adopt the dogs. Leaving your home is no longer allowed, so they just killed the dogs. And the population put up with it. They were told they had to. Nightly news in Australia now looks like a science fiction film. One recent report described a 27-year-old fugitive. Was he a mass killer? No. He had dared to venture outside of his apartment complex. For doing that, for leaving the building, the media showed surveillance footage of the man entering an elevator and then, brace yourselves, sneezing without covering his face. There was no one else in the elevator at the time. For that, there is now a nationwide manhunt underway. An arrest warrant for this man has just been issued. We're not making this up. And that man is not the only person the Australian media and police are hunting for tonight. One Australian news outlet just reported, and we're quoting, "A tip to Crime Stoppers has blown the lid on a church service attended by 60 adults and children. The gathering has been described as selfish and arrogant," end quote, for going to church. So what else in Australia is now considered, quote, selfish and arrogant? It's not just going to church or leaving your apartment or trying to adopt a dog. Watching the sunset is also selfish and arrogant. Watch.
There's a whole bunch of people down the Ryback Beach last night who thought the best thing to do was to go and watch the sunset. I'm sure it was a beautiful sunset. But that's not in the spirit or in the letter of these rules.
Scolded for watching the sunset, executing rescue dogs, a nationwide manhunt for a guy who sneezed alone in an elevator. No one in Australia is laughing at this. No one can stand back far enough to see the lunacy on display. They're too far gone. This has been in the works for a long time, by the way. A situation like this does not happen overnight, long before COVID. In 2016, the government of Australia ended almost all legal protections for public protests. And at the time, people tolerated it. They trusted their government. They didn't think it was necessarily a big deal. So on Saturday this weekend, as protesters gathered in Melbourne, the government used its new authority to silence them.
What did I breathe? What did I... Someone get catch it! Put your hands behind your back! Put your hands behind your back! Put your hands behind your back!
If that were Iran, if that footage was shot in Tehran over the weekend, we'd all tug our chins and say, of course, the mullahs, they're not like us.
Now, the situation in Australia is pretty dire, and in this circumstance, it's unfortunate that the country has some very unique attributes. Now, we have roughly 25 million people, and the landmass is similar in size to the continental US. Now, we tend to live in the coastal regions, which makes up, I think, about 90% of the population, and we're completely waterlocked. Now, what does all this mean? Well, infrastructure is paid by around the 20 million or so workers through their taxes to build the roads, power networks, etc. across the entire continent, the size of the continental US. Now, getting logistics to the entire population isn't easy, and unlike the US, where you have, 280 or 300 million workers paying taxes, or the UK with much more people than Australia, but much less land. Now, Tucker Carlson mentioned that Australia is in a complete lockdown. We're not. So New South Wales, ACT and Victoria, and if you're not familiar, check it out on the map and I'll outline it here, is still quite a large area, and most of it is not populated, but it's still a sizable amount of the population due to the densities living in the coastal regions. Now, there's heavy debate as to whether lockdowns work. Now, if you're in a country that has land borders, where crossing into that country from others is vastly easier, locking down probably isn't going to be as effective. This isn't to say that they're not harmful to Australians. By all measures, the citizens here aren't happy at all with the situation, but neither is the medical system when COVID cases or close contact cases increase rapidly. So the COVID rollout here, the vaccine rollout, has been a debacle, and the flow-on effects are pretty noticeable. The Delta variant is spread much faster and those who are vaccinated will still carry and spread the Delta variant. Now, in a country where most people have been vaccinated except a minority group of anti-vaxxers, the realist in me says, well, damn them, if they don't want to get vaccinated, too bad, they can deal with getting COVID. But in Australia, the vulnerability in the population isn't just anti-vaxxers. It's those who want the vax, but they can't get it soon enough. So those people that are still in danger, and that's something that we need to think about. Now, Yale Medicine published an article in mid-August outlining the potential of the Delta strain, and Australia is certainly proving everything outlined in that article. It's pretty much exactly what they said. Now, to talk about the vaccine rollout, I signed up for the Give Me the Vax state-run vaccination program registration thing, and I was emailed back saying that I'd have to wait for an opening, which I expected. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard from them since, and I expect, based on the projections, that I'll have to wait until around early October. Now, I don't live in a lockdown city, and where I live, we don't have any reported cases of COVID and haven't for a long time. And I'm sure that would contribute to the lethargy, at least in my area. It's not a high priority for rolling out the vaccine, but it's still an issue. So back to the reporting and Tucker Carlson. This isn't anything new. Now, I first noticed a very heavy bias in media, and at the time largely influenced by the government, I believe, when I was in the back end of my high school in the late 90s. So the reporting at that time, it wasn't journalism. It didn't account for the events across the gamut. It was very selective and used to push a certain agenda. Now, I won't go into exactly what that situation was, but I'm sure you can work it out. Think like global issues from the mid to late 90s and war crimes. Anyway, since that time, I've taken the news media with a grain of salt and always take the Occam's razor approach to the facts, and then do a little digging and see what I can come up with across the board. And generally, I find the truth is somewhere in the middle. So what do you think about the Western news media at the moment? And do you take time to look into the actual situation and do some fact checking, or just take what is said at face value from your preferred outlet? Until next time.